So there were two sessions scheduled for this room. I think they've updated, but this is your first Drupal 8 module, not the. There was one about JavaScript that was also scheduled here. It's not here. I would guess it's back there in the other room, but I'm not positive.
Someone said till then.
Okay, so maybe until then. But you might. I think the website probably has been updated just recently, maybe. Okay, so the JavaScript one is across the way in Stephen Lounge if you're here for the scaling JS JavaScript stuff. All right, so let's start because it's a lot to cover. My name is Ted Bowman. I'm Ted Bow on Drupal.org. I created the Entity Form module, soon to be the eForm module on Drupal 8. I'm a Drupal trainer. I'm on a podcast called the Drupal Easy Podcast. I have a training company called 6 Mile Tech. You can follow me at 6miletech.com. Drupal training consulting, pretty much everything from like an hour of Skype or Hangout time to 5 days on site Drupal training, ramping up teams to work with Drupal 7 or Drupal 8. So feel free to contact me either via my website or just talk to me after the session if you're interested. And I also do project mentoring if you're taking on a site that you just want some guidance on. Yeah, and I have a Drupal 7 module development class on the site. Obviously not what I'm covering today. This is your first Drupal 8 module. This is a slide slightly wrong there. So how many people have experience making Drupal 7 modules? Okay, fair amount of people. How many people have no experience with Drupal modules? Okay. So Drupal 8 has changed a lot. So warning, Drupal 8 is mostly stable, but things could be changing. We're at RC2 right now. So my code is up to date with RC2. Because RC2 just came out, I don't have it broken up as nicely as I usually do. But it is, so we'll walk through the code. I'll give a few introduction slides and walk through the code. So it's an exciting, not so scary point, hopefully. I used to, when I was doing this a few times on the beta levels, I would say, I would really warn people that it's, my demo might not work. You might find things different when you download Drupal. But hopefully, so the last time I gave this session was in July, I think. And so this week when I was updating my module for the session, my demo module, I think I only had to make a few changes, and I basically had to take out some logic that I used to have to take care of myself as far as making safe markup that I just don't have to worry about anymore because now Twig takes care of it for me. So this is the first time. I mean, I've been doing this session for a couple of years. This is the least amount of changes I've had to make, and it was probably the largest gap between times. So, 4 or 5 months and only one small change. So that just gives you an idea of how stable at this point the APIs are, at least for the stuff that I'm using. They're very stable.
Can you go back and make yourself a slide
Are you looking?
You have the URL for slide deck.
Oh, did I? There was a URL for the slide deck? Yeah, I know the slide deck is changing, so this version's not out there yet. So a lot of people raise their hand. They had done Drupal 7 programming. I usually recommend Drupal. I definitely in Drupal 7, as a trainer, did not recommend learning PHP via Drupal because Drupal has a lot of Drupalisms. I still don't necessarily recommend, ideal case scenario, I don't recommend learning to program via Drupal just because Drupal is a really complex system that I think it helps to do some simpler, just sort of tutorials beforehand. So it obviously helps a lot more now to know object-oriented programming. And again, I don't think Drupal 8 is, Drupal 8 has great object-oriented practices, but I don't necessarily think it's a great way to learn object-oriented programming because again, you're jumping in a really complex system. But with the caveat that if it motivates you to learn it, then it's a good way to learn it, right? If I tell you should go out and do tutorials about very simple object-oriented principles, and you're not motivated to do it, but you are motivated to learn how to make a module, then obviously it's a good way to make it. I also recommend obviously knowing the basic functions of Drupal, so I have an idea what you might want to make a module to do, and experience with some modules to get an idea of, especially if you're making a module for work, what you might not want to spend time making a module for because it's already been done well. So obviously you might want to make a module to contribute it to Drupal.org. Obviously if you're making it for a company to reuse functionality between sites. Probably one of the most common use cases is like business logic that you're not going to find a contrib module for. I think really important though, learning to debug and contrib in core. If you don't really know how to make a module, then it's really hard to, one, assess if a particular module is good or not, as far as the underlying code, and two, if something goes wrong, especially with contrib, it's hard to sort of figure out what might be going wrong if you have no idea how modules work. So Drupal actually Drupal 8 has a bunch of hooks still in it. It's still very useful, and I think for the use case of most small modules that you might be making custom, is hooks are still there. A lot of people raise their hand as far as doing Drupal 7, but some people didn't, so I'm just going to go through real quick how hooks work. Basically, you could hook into functions of Drupal. Example would be an entity is loading, like a node, and you want to add stuff to it. You want to alter a form. You can alter any form on the site. You want to react to a user logging in. And how it works is, and this is for hooks only, this is for not the other stuff that I'm about to cover. So it's old school, but still useful. You don't call Drupal. Drupal will call you. And basically what happens is you write a function with a magic name. And this is when I came from Java to Drupal 5, and I just hated this. I still don't really like it. And it's, Drupal 8, you don't have to rely on this for a lot of things, but for hooks you still do. So basically Drupal looks for a naming pattern like this, your module and then the hook name. So how this looks is we have a module called token, we have a hook called hook form alter, and then we have, this becomes token form alter. So this is the Drupal 7 example. I haven't actually looked at Drupal 8 to see if this hook is still there, but there would be hooks like this. And basically this is the token module saying, if we're on, this is token form alter. Says if we're on a particular form ID, or in this case one of 3, I would like to change it. So how this works is, how readable is that? Anybody know what that thing on the right is? That little golden brown thing? It's a token for the token module. So the resolution maybe is not so great. So Drupal says, hey, I'm making a form. Who wants to change it? Token says, hey, I want to change it. Drupal says, here it is. I'm trusting you. Token says, okay, cool. I've changed it. I'm giving it back to you. I forgot to highlight the really important part. I used to have a slide. The very bottom right corner very bottom left corner is the really most important one. Is Drupal's saying, hey, I'm trusting you. You could basically set the form to null. Drupal is not going to care. Drupal doesn't, have intentions. It's just fine with whatever you do. So that's one of the reasons. Just be careful what you do, what contrib modules you pass in. So this is old school how Drupal 7 works. Drupal core adds the concept of plugins. So basically a lot of things that you used to do, hook block info, field formatter info, view handlers, that's all done with plugins now. And what's nice, how many people ever use these particular field formatter hooks in Drupal 7? So basically how it used to work is you do one hook for saying, hey, here are my field formatters that I want to declare. That's your info hook. And then you do another hook that would be like, hey, when you use my field formatter, this is the output that I'm going to output. And then you might have some other optional ones that would be like, hey, here is my form for this particular field formatter. And you pretty much just had to use this magic naming convention, which is kind of annoying. And if you didn't know about these other hooks, these optional ones, your field formatter might still work, but you wouldn't know the other things you could do. With plugins, because they're classes, basically, again, how many people have done object-oriented programming? So somewhat. Because you're extending a class in Drupal 8, your IDE can tell you like, hey, these are some optional functions you could override, or especially for the ones that are required, it says you extended this class, it will be a fatal PHP error unless you implement these other two functions. But we'll see more of that in code. I'm going to sort of skip some of this. Basically, again, replacing stuff like hook block info, hook entity info. Drupal 8 is classy, and you have classes you can use for services. These are basically really probably simple classes you define. You say, hey, here they are in the services YAML. Here's the classes they are. And a lot of times this would be business logic, or you could use it for business logic in custom modules. But we'll see how we use that. Let's see that we have an hour. I probably want to just jump right to code. So we're going to make a module called role notices, and basically what this does is this allows admins to add notices to your site, and I'm going to show you the finished version, and then we're going to start from the beginning and rebuild it. So, live demo, not as scary as when it was in beta, but I'm not live coding, luckily. Just live getting. Okay, so check out. This code is on Drupal.org. It's better split up for the previous versions of Drupal 8, but it'll be split up soon for the RC2. And should not be taking this long. Okay. So, I wasn't thinking the resolution would be this though, sorry. So in Drupal 8, you can't clear cache all. You have to do this thing called cache rebuild. So actually Drush will tell you that, which is nice, that you can clear cache, just not all your caches at once you do the rebuild. So now that we've done that, we have the module enabled. Let me amp up the resolution. Too much. How's that? All right? Readable? Not? Okay. All right, so this is a finished version of the module that I'm going to show you the back end for in a second. Sorry. Maybe my computer's running slow because I'm not plugged in. Okay. So we actually have a demo site with no content on it, but if we go to people, where we have people permissions and all that stuff, we're going to have a new tab called role notices, if I enable the module correctly. Sorry. Wrong version of the module. So if you use this module, if you look at if you make changes, basically every time you make, not every change, but most changes you would make in making a module, you have to go cache rebuild. So I didn't have this tab here, and it's not going to read the YAML files basically until I do the cache rebuild. So we have this tab here, role notices, and we have two text boxes here, one for each of our anonymous roles. So I'm going to say, thanks for being a member. And then here, I'll just say, you have a lot of power, because they're an administrator. So we're going to save the settings. What's happening now is this is slightly different than a lot of stuff you'll see in Drupal 8, is I'm not using the configuration management system. And so there's basically in Drupal 7 we had variable get and variable set, which you use for a lot of this type of configuration. And it wasn't exported obviously to any kind of configuration management unless you were using features. So in Drupal 7 we used variable get and variable set for things that were both configuration and then site state. So site state would be, is your site offline or not? So obviously you wouldn't want to commit that to configuration management and move that from dev to production. So that would be site state in Drupal 8, and that's what I'm using, the state system. So what happens is it saves this, and then if I go back to the site, I have a block, which I guess I haven't placed yet, but we'll go into block layout here. And we have a new block, so this is the new Drupal 8 block page. So instead of having a list down at the bottom of the block that I would make, I've made in Drupal 8, you place a block, so I'm going to go to sidebar first, and I will search for my block by name, so role notices. I'm going to place the block. And again, I didn't do any of this. This is just the block system. I'm going to keep the title here. And then once I save it, and I go back to the home page, there's going to be a block here that says, it's going to give me basically all of the messages for whatever roles that I have. So I'm an administrator, so obviously I have authenticated user and administrator. So this is the gist of the module. There's just, I think, one other feature where you see it on your profile too, here. So, and this is in the Manage Display tab. So this is the gist of the module. Maybe you would use it at a university. You have a roll of students. You say, remember, registration ends on Friday, something like that. Anybody have any questions about like the intention of the module? Or it's more like a demo module. I don't really want you guys to install it on your sites. It should be secure, but about, you guys understand like what it does and its purpose? Messages to user based on roles. Pretty easy. One thing problem about making demo modules for Drupal is thinking of something that hasn't been done already. So let's look at the code. We're going to switch back to the very, very basics of this module. And if you download this from Drupal.org, or actually more if you clone it, it's going to be different versions of the module will be, we'll have simplified versions. So this is the 8.1 issue. Let me see if I can not. All right, I'm going to try to switch resolutions. It's not going to let me. Okay, so basically all we have right here, and I can make this bigger, is a YAML file. And this is a file that's my name, my module, .info.yaml. So this is what used to be the info file. It looks pretty similar. One of the things you might notice is there's a type module. So this would be type theme, obviously, if it was a theme. This is just the new YAML format. I'm saying I have a dependency of block. It's YAMLs, I would say, a little bit harder than info files to get right because of indentation. It needs to be exact. But if you have an IDE, it should tell you if you're getting it right or not. This is basically how you do a series, so I could add multiple dependencies there. But for our case, since we're making a block as our main function, I'm going to make it dependent on block. Questions about what you see? Okay, so this basically just gets it on the module page. And again, because I'm removing functionality, I need to clear cache to make it work again. So let's go to the next step of the module, which is really going to be like a hello world, let's get something on the screen. So now, all right, I might have to back out to show the whole module. Like I said, RC2 just came out, so I was sort of refactoring this module, and I might only have the final working version. Okay, so I'll introduce the parts as they go. So basically, instead of hook menu in Drupal 8, we actually have a few things. So hook menu did a bunch of things like defining callbacks, adding access to those callbacks, providing menu links. But in Drupal 8, that's actually split out over a few files. So what we're looking at here is the routing.yaml file. And the one that we're concerned about now is the, can people read, is this big enough text? The one we're looking at now is the rnotices.hello. So this is my test route. So again, this is YAML format, and I'm just basically saying, this is the machine name of my route. And I tell it a path, which in this case is going to be /admin/report/role notices. And then I'm telling it what should control this route. And instead of telling it just a function name, like I would in Drupal 7, where all the functions are in the global scope, and it's just, okay, it's just going to load them all, and I have to put the one in the module file, I'm actually going to load a particular class, and this is the namespace for the class, and Drupal 8 is going to figure out how to load that, because, and I could get this wrong, I think it's a PSR4 spec that Drupal's using. So if I put this in the right place, which I'll show you what is the right place in a second, it's going to call then the function page on there. And I'm just giving it the hard-coded title of test title. I could also make a function to create the title if I wanted to. And then I'm going to say, you have to have the permissions administer role notices to get this, or you're going to get access denied. So I could have used a predefined permission, like maybe you have to be able to administer blocks. So it doesn't have to be mine, but in my case, this is mine. So if we look at the, I know you guys can't see this, but basically I have a folder called SRC, and then below that I have a folder called controller. And though you can't see the folder structure, this is basically the folder structure right here, except for role notices. So under my folder, I have an SRC, which means my source, and then this is my folder structure, everything to the right of my module name. So I have role notices, and then the class that's in there is role notices controller. So in Drupal 8, you're actually extending a lot of classes that Drupal core is going to provide, and how I learned it is I basically tried to look at the most simple examples and see what they were doing, and then try to extend the same classes. So I think I initially got this probably from the help page, because it's one of the easiest pages on Drupal. So basically, I'm extending something called controller base, and this is just going to give me some convenient functions. I think one of the functions it gives me is the T function for translate. So whenever possible in Drupal 8, you should avoid calling global functions. You should be calling it from the particular object. So I'm calling it role notices controller. In this case, it has to match the name of my file, which is role notices controller.php. And I'm using something here which we didn't have in Drupal 7, but I think they've started to add support for it now, is the namespace. And the namespace, again, has to do with, it correlates to my folder structure. So everything after my module name here, where Drupal and then role notices, starts with the folders under my src directory. So I have that here. I have this use statement, which I don't have to think about a lot because I use an IDE. So this is, again, I think if the most beneficial thing I could tell you today is if you're not using an IDE for Drupal 8, use an IDE. It will just save you incredible amounts of time, stop you from making mistakes. So let's just look at what it does. If I delete that, my IDE says, hey, I have no idea what that controller base is. But if I was to be typing it, it's going to say, hey, there's a couple controller bases. Which one do you want to use? I use it, I throw it in there, and it automatically just adds the use statement I just deleted. So if you remember back on the routing file, there was a function off my controller called page. This is just a simple public function. And at this point, we're actually looking at something that looks a lot like Drupal 7. I make a render array, I call it, I say it's the type markup, and then I just told you guys you shouldn't be using global function, but I did. It works, but I shouldn't be doing it. I should be doing this -t. So basically what I'm saying is, I'm extending controller base. Whatever controller base thinks is the correct translate function, I will use that. So it takes away my responsibility for knowing if that's the correct one or not. That's the whole point of like extending, or one of the great things about extending the classes is it's going to give me a lot of stuff. And assuming that Drupal core, is made correctly, then I can just trust that that's the right one. So I'm going to translate hello world. And that's it. That's my whole controller class. So most of what you see here is just comments. So again, it's a class that extends controller base, and then a public function that returns a render array. So let's go to the home page, and right now, because I haven't actually made or haven't showed you how the menu works, I would have to just know where it is. So I copy it from my route. And again, this is kind of similar to Drupal 7, where this would be the key to your items array and hook menu. So I'm going to put this at the end of my URL after my site name. And crossing fingers, we have a problem, Houston. So first thing, when I have a problem, is to clear cache or cache rebuild. And oftentimes, if I have a serious error, it will just tell me in my cache rebuild, which it did. No, it didn't. No, it just said cache rebuild complete. Yeah, so it was probably a matter of what happened is I showed you the very simple version, and then I checked out the git tag, so I have new controllers, new classes, stuff like that, and I haven't rebuilt the caches to tell Drupal, it's like, okay, go check my module for everything. So it's just a hello world right here. So let's look at how we would actually get a menu item on that. Anybody have any questions about this? So basically, again, what we've gone over is we have a route file that says, hey, here's the route that I need. And honestly, how I learned to do this was, again, I just looked at existing route files. I looked at a particular URL that I thought might be simple in Drupal core. I searched for that URL. Basically, what I would do is, as far as learning Drupal 8, let's pick another route file, this one that we can kind of say is probably unique. If I go to Manage, Configuration, System, Site Information, if I took that URL admin up to information and I searched within my IDE and said, look for that exact text, case sensitive, but only show me files where the pattern is *.routing .yaml, then it's going to find me where that route is. I can just say, oh, that's how they made their route. Let me copy their information and see if I can get mine to work. So any questions about the route? All right, so let's look at how permissions are made. And in Drupal 7, we would have to implement hook permissions to define what permissions we have. In Drupal 8, this is much simpler. We just have a YAML file that has a unique name for the permission as the key, and then the title for what we want to show up on the permissions page. So some things in Drupal 8 are a lot simpler, and this is one of them. So I could just add more permissions just by copying this, and make it a new title. There's probably other stuff I could put here as far as help, or I could also put a flag to say, hey, this is a security, this permission has security implications. Questions on that? Okay, I do like when Drupal 8 makes some stuff simpler. Now we probably want to make a menu to that hello page. This again, you would, like I showed you the route before, and that was from hook menu in Drupal 7. Now I'm showing you how to make a menu item, and that also would have been in hook menu in Drupal 7. So there's a lot of stuff, especially with the menu system, that's broken out into multiple YAMLs. So again, I'm making a machine name for my menu item. I'm returning it back a title, a description, and now I'm returning it back a route name. So this route name has to correspond to obviously an existing route. In this case, we're using the route that we just defined in the routing YAML file. So if I searched inside my YAML, I would find this exact same route name. That's permissions route. So I have my exact same route name here. So it just has to match. And the only other thing I have to do is, well, this is optional. I'm telling it the parent route, and so this is basically the admin systems report. So again, I do not tell it the parent menu item. So, no, sorry, I do tell the parent menu item. I don't tell it the parent route. So the actual URL for my parent route could change, and I have no opinion on that. So it separates out your menu from your route, so your actual URL could change easily without having to change your actual menu structure. And it really makes it very easily actually to put my route in multiple different menu areas. So what this looks like on the page, if I go down to reports, and this is because I'm at admin reports, there's a role notices hello world, and bam, there you are. So this is going to be something very similar for what we do for the form. Any questions on that so far? Okay, so let's look at how we actually would make the form. So again, if I go to the finished module at people, there's a new tab, role notices, and there's a new form here which has one text area for each of our roles. So let's look at how that's done. So to start off with, every time I want to control a new URL, I have to make a new entry in my routing file. So again, we're back to the role notices.routing.yaml file. And we have a machine name here, role notices.settings form. So what you should be doing here is for every route, the first part of it should be the machine name of your module, so you don't accidentally ever conflict with another route. Again, I just tell it the path that I want. And then the defaults is basically what's going to control this when I go there. And you'll notice that on the previous hello world, I told it was a controller. So this is sort of the very basics of what you can do to control a route. Now I'm telling it, hey, this is a form. So it's going to, it actually would throw me an error, I think, if this class that I'm using didn't extend the form base class. And the other thing that you'll notice is that on the hello world, I actually had to tell it, okay, which function should you call on that controller? And which also means that I could have multiple routes going to that same controller, going to different functions, or actually going to the same function and passing it different arguments. But here, I just tell it the class. And because I told it it's a form, Drupal is going to know to call certain functions on that class and make the form appropriately. And again, the same thing, I just use my same permission. So let's look at this class. Okay. So again, like the controller, I'm extending something that Drupal 8 gave me. So I'm extending the form base class, which is, this is obviously the base of what you would need for a form. There's other things that extend this, like there's a config form that if I'm making configuration changes, I could use that as a starting point. So because I'm extending this, there's a few things that I need to do. And if I X out this get form ID, again, my IDE is going to tell me right away, hey, you said you're extending form base, but you haven't provided me with the get form ID function, so it's going to have an error. So one nice thing about having an ID is I can just scroll over and it'll just tell me, hey, you need to implement get form ID. And if I didn't know what get form ID was, I would just go up to form base, and I would look there, and this is an abstract class, but I could look at the some things in Drupal 8 are not simpler. It's actually not in get form base. It's actually in an interface that get form base implements, so form interface. So there are definitely, the structure here, one thing that's nice about the interface is I could say, don't show me all the classes or the functions within this class. Show me all the functions in this class and that it implements. So in that case, I could find the get form ID, but it would be in another interface. But it would show me it would have the documentation of like, why am I implementing this class? So this is basically in Drupal 7, in most cases, your form ID was actually just a function name in most cases. So we still need a form ID as far as, for us module builders, we need it for hook form ID alter, or in hook form alter, so we know which form we want to deal with. I'm sure there's other purposes that it has in Drupal core, but that's, as a module builder, that's really what the form ID is really handy for. So going back to the form, I'm extending form base. I am getting the form ID here. And then I'm implementing a function called build form. And so basically, this is another one where I have to do build form, this exact name, or my IDE in PHP will have a fatal error. And this, when I call the form, or when I extend this class and I tell my route, hey, this is my form, and this is how I build my form, I really actually don't need to know what Drupal 8 is doing to get to this build form function, because it's probably doing a bunch of stuff before it gets here. All I have to know is that at this point, I need to return a render array, form array, and the form array is almost identical to how form arrays work in Drupal 7. So this would be, probably the closest thing this is in Drupal 7 is actually the form builder function for any particular form. And you'll see here, I'm not going to go through all this because of time, but basically I'm making a very similar form to Drupal 7. And then at the end, I am just returning that form array. So if you look here at this form actions, this is almost identical. I'm making a submit button that I would make exactly in Drupal 7. So if you do have Drupal 7 modules, say for custom, that have custom forms in your Drupal 7 sites, moving them to Drupal 8, yes, you'll have to create these classes around it, but the actual arrays that you have and the complex logic maybe for making those arrays will be pretty easy to move in. So that is what gets us on this page, this form handler here. So in Drupal 7, there were a couple ways, basically, once you submit the form, to have a function called when you submit it. And the easiest one in Drupal 8 was a magic naming function where you basically say, whatever name I used for the form builder, I'm going to use that same name plus underscore submit. So we don't have to do that anymore, thankfully. There's something here again. This is a method I'm overriding from the form-based class. And the difference between this, let's actually X this. If I X out the build form, it's immediately going to give me an error and say, actually, you have to do build form. But I think if I X out submit form, okay, that's actually, I guess, one of the ones I also need to. So you're not, it doesn't really make any sense to have a form if you're not going to have a submit function. So again, if I just made a form and I extended form base, I would get 3 errors right away. You have to give me a get form ID, you have to give me a build form, and you have to give me a submit form. From my perspective, this is a lot easier than Drupal 7, because in Drupal 7, I would have to know how a submit function works, that I have to do the underscore submit at the end. Here, my IDE just tells me exactly which methods I need to make. So it is a bit of a jump, but I think once you get used to it, having a good IDE can sort of guide you through Drupal 8 development. This is a bit different. The submit functions are somewhat similar, but a bit different in Drupal 8. So in Drupal 8, there was the form state variable that came to your submit functions and also to your builder. How many people have dealt with the form state array? How many people love the form state array? Okay, the form state array was like horrible in Drupal 7. I probably could never make something as good at it, but running through and trying to figure out what's in it was just crazy. So form state here, because we're using this interface, my IDE can tell me what the functions are about it. So if I didn't know how to get the values out of this form state interface, I could just start typing and it would say, oh, do you want to get a value? Do you want to get the form object? Do you want to get the build info? Do you want to get the buttons? So if I start typing value, it says, oh, do you want to get a value or do you want to get all the values? And I say, yes, I want to get all the values. So right away, this is, for me, reason enough to switch to Drupal 8 right here, is not have to navigate a nested array to get these type of things. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm saying, give me everything that the user submitted, and then, which I'm going to skip over for a second, I'm going to call a class here called Notices Manager, and I'm going to call a function called setAllNotices. And then I'm just going to do a very similar thing to Drupal 7, where I say, hey, the notices have been saved. Anybody have any questions on the form interface, what I've covered so far? All crystal clear or all really, really confusing? Crystal clear? Really, really confusing? Neither? Okay, it does take a little bit of going into it, you know. 1 hour is a lot to go over. But again, so my form class needs to get an ID, needs to build the form, and needs to have a function to submit the form. But remember, in my routing, all I told it was, here is the form class. How that gets called is all up to Drupal 8. Okay, so I'm saving the form in this Notice Manager, which is just a class that I made. So we're going to look at the class. The class is actually very simple, except for the one part where it's not. So this get save all notices, just takes the array, and this is the array we got from the form state, and it is going to basically get the Drupal state object and then just call set on it with a key. So I'm basically very much similar to variable set right here. This is the only difference is in Drupal 8, or Drupal 7, there's no difference between configuration variable set and form state. The idea here is that if I'm putting messages on my site for people of a role, and these are things that are going to change over time, and these are things that I want to give my web admin the ability to change, because I don't want to commit these actual notice texts to Git and move them up from dev stage to production. This is something that's going to change on the live site. So I'm not using the configuration management for this, and partly because of the demo, and partly, introducing the configuration management is a lot here. So this is just a separate class that I made that if we didn't want to go into services, I could just say, I just load this one. And I could make an example of where I just create a new instance of the class, and I just load it, and I call this. So that would work for Drupal 8. But the Drupal 8 way is to actually make a service that your container, which basically we can sort of think of the container as Drupal itself for all intents and purposes. The container is going to give me an instance of this object. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying to Drupal, let's look at this services file. And this services file is there's a whole bunch of comments in it. But mostly what I'm doing here is I'm saying, hey, I have one or more services that I'd like to let Drupal know about. In this case, we only have one. And I'm just picking an ID, again, with my machine name, and then something that's meaningful to me, my notices manager. And I'm telling it the class that is going to be basically this service. So again, I told you I could have just loaded the class directly, but this we'll see the benefit of this, me using the services file. And then the other thing that I'm doing here is I'm sending it some arguments. And so what I'm saying is, I need some other services that Drupal core knows about. So I'm saying I need current user and I need state. So I need to know who the current user is, and I need to have access to the state, basically the variable get and variable set methods for Drupal 8. And I actually have no opinion on what Drupal wants to give me back, as long as they're going to follow if they're going to use an account interface and a state interface, I really have no opinion on what actual classes it uses. Now I could look and figure out which classes it uses, but another module could come out and swap that for a different one. And as long as that module uses the right interface, then for me, I don't really care. And I think that is the only things I have to do. So I'm declaring Drupal, I'm saying this is a service I want to provide. Right now I'm providing it to myself, but another module could come in and say, hey, I want this service too, because I want to display the messages in a different way. This avoids me having to create a global function that other modules would call. So how many people have looked into dependency injection or have used dependency injection? Dependency injection is, I'm just going to sort of introduce it here, but if I go into it, it took me a while to figure it out, and it usually kind of like kills the room. So basically what I'm saying is, in this one, this is my form, we're back to my form. I have two functions that I need. One is the create, and this is basically what I'm telling Drupal. When you need an instance of my form class, make it by calling this create function. And what this return new static is this says make a new static instance of my class by calling my constructor and send it this particular variable here. And this variable is basically saying, the container, we can sort of think of Drupal, get me the role notices manager. And again, you'll notice that this here matches the exact same unique key I used in my services.yaml file. So if I needed some other service from Drupal core like the current user, I would just say container get current user or container get configuration manager, something like that. So here I do have to check to see what interface this implements so that I know what it's going to return to me. But I'm just asking the container, and most likely, since it's my module, it will be the exact same class, but it's not guaranteed. It's just guaranteed to use this interface. And then my constructor, I have one argument, which is the thing I just told it to send me, which is a notices manager. Actually, in this case, just keep it simple, I didn't use the interface. So if somebody wanted to swap it out, it would have to be either my notices manager or a subclass of my notices manager. And I just say, hey, store this in the object as my notices manager so that every time I get it, I don't have to ask it from Drupal. So I could skip this and just say every time I need the notices manager, I'm going to ask Drupal for it. But after my class is created in my build and my submit, I can just use the one I just stored. So if we look here at my submit function, I'm saying use the notices manager you got when you started and call set all notices. My other option here would be, if I wanted to say, dependency injection is confusing, I don't want to use it, I could just say manager equals new notices manager, and then at this point I would have to figure out how to get the Drupal current user, and then I'd have to figure out how to get the Drupal Drupal state. And remember, I only was able to get the current user really easily because I'm getting an IDE, which can look at the global Drupal object and say, what do you have available for me? And it says, well, I have a function called current user, and that's probably the one I want to use. So if I want to say, dependency injection is just way too difficult, I could just use it this way. And now I have the set all notices. So dependency injection is good for testability, and it's good to be able to swap out the services, but it's not necessary for your functions to actually work. We have a question on that? So let's go quickly into making how the block is made. So the block is in a directory under my source directory called plugin, and then underneath there a directory called block. So this is basically the block plugin manager is going to look in this directory. And basically, my block is pretty simple. It just extends block base. And again, you'll notice I have this notice manager. And basically, I'm doing the same exact thing I was doing before to get that notice manager. I'm using dependency injection. And the only thing, I have a very similar build function, which is really similar to Drupal hook block view. And I'm just returning it a render array, which looks almost exactly the same as a Drupal 7 version, because I'm saying pound theme item list, and then pound items, calling my manager to get my list of items. So this part is very similar to Drupal 7, but instead of using my theme function or the item list theme function or a TPL file, it's just going to call a twig file. And in this case, it's not a twig file that I control, so I just hand it over to core, say you handle or theme handle how item list should be handled. And I just get my notices, I return them in a render array, and that's why, voila, if I remember, did I place the block yet? Yeah, the block is over here. So we have just a couple minutes. I hope to get through more, but it's a lot to get through. There is, if you want to look at the code on Drupal.org, you can just Google Drupal rule notices or Google Drupal Tedbo, and you'll find the full repo. Just make sure you're using the latest 8.3 branch in this case. and it has the whole completed version, which most of what is in there actually did go through, but there's showing the notices on the user page also. And the only thing that I know doesn't work right now is the clearing of the cache when you change the blocks, or when you change the notices. Any other questions? All right. Well, feel free to catch me after the session, or I'll be around today if you have any questions about Drupal 8. Again, probably the most valuable thing I could say is start using an IDE if you're not. The examples module for Drupal 8 is out there now, has a lot of good examples. But really right now, the best example is Drupal 4, and pretty much how I learned to make this module and other modules I'm looking at is I just looked at Drupal 4. In Drupal 7, I looked at contrib a lot to figure out how to do things. In Drupal 8, there's not a lot of contrib out there, and you're not sure if the contrib is up to date or not. So pretty much for most of the stuff I did, I sort of tore into core and tried to figure out how it was doing what it was doing. And I think it's also a sort of good example for standards and stuff like that. So thanks for coming. Let me know if you have any questions after. All right, thanks.